Hi everyone. So, I don't know whether you realise this or not. I don't know whether I'm actually giving you breaking news here, but the governments, Western governments, your government in the US, mine over here, Australia, elsewhere, they lie to us. They have been doing for quite some time. um, quite some time. I know it's devastating, isn't it? You had no idea that our governments actually lie to us, the people they're meant to serve. Um, See, I've already messed it up. However, when they do lie to us, there are three questions we can ask that pretty much will tell you whether they are lying or not. There are just three questions you need to ask. I'll go through them in a bit. But here's proof of them lying to us. Here's just some evidence from the last century, 1915. Lusitania carried no munitions. Lusitania was sunk by the Germans. I think they said it was a German U-boat, but I don't think U-boats were available back then. I think it was only Second World War. I think it was a German boat that sunk it. And they said there were no munitions on it. It wasn't a target. Therefore, US got involved in the First World War. It was a lie. The Lusitania was absolutely chocked to the brim with munitions. Total lie. World War One, America got involved in the war. I know I'm going to be concentrating on America here, but a lot of this, especially the last two, we got involved in as well. 1964, we were attacked in the Tonkin Gulf, they said. The American government. Really, were you? No, as it turns out, they weren't attacked. That was a lie as well, but that was the incident that led the US to going in and going to war with Vietnam. 3 million Vietnamese dead. 3 million. And tens of thousands of American troops dead. And obviously, all of the troops that came home, they suffered PTSD and all sorts of horrible things, amputations, etc. So that was the fallout from that lie. And then in 1991, George Bush Sr. Wanted to go to war in Iraq, but he didn't have the support for it at home, strangely enough. The general public don't like law or like war, so he didn't have the support in it. Cue that lady. I can't remember her name now. It was Faria or something like that. They killed incubator babies, was the lie. They said that she said that Saddam Hussein's troops, she saw them come into the hospital in Iraq and throw the incubator babies on the floor, killing them. It never happened. The incubator babies did die, but they weren't killed by the Iraqi troops. They died because they were being bombed, and the nurses and the doctors had to leave the hospital and left them there. That's why it happened. And that little girl there, she's not so little anymore. She was related to a Kuwaiti prince. I think she was a Kuwaiti prince's daughter, if I remember right, or niece. And she'd also taken acting lessons. Amnesty International originally corroborated her story and had to pull their corroboration because turned out it was absolutely false. But obviously we didn't find that out until after the first Gulf War, or it was well underway, or afterwards. And then obviously we got 2003 with W's lie about Iraq as WMDs and Colin Powell with the anthrax at the UN. Total lie. 4 instances. That's just 4. There are many others. There are the lies that led us into Afghanistan, and there's all the other lies that we've seen. But there's the 4 major ones. And you could go back further than that if you wanted, and you could go back to the 18th, 17th centuries if you want, especially with the UK. And this is the USS Maine that was sunk, I think in 1890 something or 1880 something. It led to the US-Spanish War. 250,000 Spanish dead. They said that Spanish saboteurs had sunk it with explosives. Turns out that hadn't happened at all. What actually happened was there was an explosion in the boiler room and it set ignite to the munitions core. That was it. It was a total accident. Needless to say, it was a lie though. And America went to war with Spain as a result. So there's a massive, long line of lies here that Western governments have told us to get us into war. And these 3 questions we can ask. These 3 questions will really tell us whether they're lying to us. The first question is, what actual evidence have you got? I don't mean what's asserted. What are you saying happened? I don't mean what's the title in the BBC, on the BBC website or in the Guardian, or what's in the Guardian. I mean, what's the actual evidence? The physical evidence, the video, the photo, whatever, the eyewitness. What is it? Second question, where's it come from? That's the second question, because often it comes from a very dubious source. A very dubious source, indeed. If the answer to that second question was, I don't know, if the answer to that second question was Alex Jones, you would immediately go, okay, there's a good chance that this is not going to be true. And then the third question is, who funds the source? So what's the evidence? Who are they? Who funds them? Those are the three things we need to know going forward when the government lie to us, and they will lie to us. And when I say the government lie to us, I mean the press as well, because the press, let's face it, they're just stenographers to power at this point. Now, the reason we have to ask those questions is because they've lied to us for so long. We're not falling for it anymore. The public, when the government tell us something, we immediately go, yeah, this isn't. It's the government. They're lying to us. Especially in the last 20 years, 30 years, with the explosion of the internet, we've got all the information we need at our fingertips. The answer to almost any question we could ever ask about the universe or anything is there at our fingertips now. So we can instantly find out so much information and debunk government lies as a result of that. So what they've had to do is change their strategy a little. Now, they've been doing this a while with something called NGOs. Ooh. But I'll get to that in a minute, because people like me are giving you the truth. And they're silencing us. And they're doing it through a third party. And this is the way the government do it. The people that are silencing us on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Google, are the Digital Forensic Research Lab. I won't go too much into these. I'll leave a link when I drop this video in the top right to another video I've done on them, because they are supported by the Atlantic Council, a very dodgy organisation who are funded by such great entities such as Wall Street, BP, the oils, JP Morgan Chase, Lockheed Martin, NATO, United States Air Force, Army, Chamber of Commerce, Department. So if the source of the information that people are bots, and this is what they're using as an excuse to delete all these accounts that are giving you the truth, if that's the evidence they've got, we're saying they're a bot. Well, what's the evidence? We're not going to show you that. Okay, who is the source? Well, the source is DFR Lab. Who funds them? The Atlantic Council, and all those people. You can immediately go, okay, that's probably total bollocks. For instance, DFR Labs were the people who identified Citizen Halo as a bot. Finnish grandmother, anti-imperialist, anti-war, called her a bot. Ian 56, market trader in the UK, anti-imperialist, anti-war, called him a bot. Partisan girl, anti-imperialist, anti-war, from Syria, now living in Australia, I believe, verified on Twitter, called her a bot. That's what the government did. And then all the media, all the Western media, the Guardian, etc., just repeated it as if it was fact. And of course it wasn't. They were real people, and they're just three large instances. If you go back to the last 800 accounts they've purged, Matt Taibbi is doing some great work on that, and from what he's been tweeting out, it looks like very few of them were actual bots. These are just people in Iran and Russia who were pissed off at the West. That's what it is. But I want to get to these NGOs that the governments are using now to sort of lie for them, if you like. And one of them, probably the chief among them when it comes to America, is the National Endowment for Democracy. Now, I don't know about you, but whenever I see an organisation, or a country for that matter, with democracy or democratic in the title, I always think to myself immediately, okay, that's not going to be democratic. It's just not. They're taking the piss there. I'm thinking it's specifically Democratic Republic of Congo. Yeah, that's not a democracy. Democratic People's Republic of North Korea. Definitely not a democracy. You could go with organisations as well. Democratic National Committee. Well, they rigged their own elections. That's about as far from democratic as you can possibly get. So this National Endowment for Democracy, funded by the US, goes around and, spreads democracy around the world. That's what we're led to believe by the mainstream media and the governments of the world. But independent media, the people who give you the truth, people like Max Blumenthal at the Grey Zone Project. That's his website. Great website. You should check it out. He calls the National Endowment for Democracy this. This was his title. Inside America's Meddling Machine. It's not very democratic, is it? The US-funded group that interferes in elections around the globe. And they call it the National Endowment for Democracy. Okay. All right. What's the evidence? Who are they? Who funds them? You start to get the picture. The governments of the US government and the UK are using these NGOs, these non-government organisations, as sort of a ruse to do their lying and their dirty work for them, and funding them. It gives them plausible deniability. Max Blumenthal went on. I'm not sure whether it's in that article actually. It might have said this since, but he says the National Endowment for Democracy is the CIA's regime change wing. So that'll give you some idea as to who they are. It's not just Max Blumenthal who has uncovered all this stuff about the National Endowment for Democracy, though. This is the World Socialist website. The National Endowment for Democracy, they say, is an instrument of regime change financed by Wall Street. Why is that bad if you're trying to spread democracy around the world? Well, look at what Wall Street and capitalism did to South America over the last 100 years. You start to get the picture. They're just raping these countries of their wealth. So the reason why I brought that up is because they're doing this not just with the NGOs, but they're also doing it with other things that have happened. Not just with wars, lied us into war, but they've also lied us into... This actually ended up, this Duma attack, in the trilateral bombing 10 days later, remember. Now, I'm not going to go into depth on the Duma attack because I've covered it in another video. Again, I'll leave a link to the videos I've done on Duma. But what I want to cover... I don't want to cover the first question because I asked that question and answered it in those videos. That's what's the evidence. But what I want to cover in this is who's the source and where do they get their funding? Because as you can see there's a video of a little girl. I can't remember her name now. You'll see the video. She's not all she seems. The little boy was fantastic though. The reason I bring this up is because this is what Theresa May used as the excuse to bomb Syria with France's and America's help. Listen to the wording that she uses here. Listen to what she says, where she says that she gets the information from. So second question, where's the information from? This is what she says.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement on the actions that we have taken, together with our American and French allies, to degrade the Syrian regime's chemical weapons capabilities and to deter their future use. On Saturday, the 7th of April, up to 75 people, including young children, were killed in a horrific attack in Duma, with as many as 500 further casualties. All indications are that this was a chemical weapons attack. UK medical and scientific experts have analysed open source reports.
There it is. Open source reports. Said it very quickly. That's what you've got to look out for.
Images and video footage from the incident.
So that's what she says, open source reports. So who are these open sources? Well, one of them we know is the White Helmets. Not going to go into depth on them because you know how I feel about the White Helmets. I set up a petition to actually stop the UK funding them because they are a very dodgy organisation. Very dodgy indeed, and that is putting it lightly. They're a propaganda construct, if you ask me, after looking at all the evidence I've seen. There's a little bit down there, but this will get... by the way, I'm just picking the BBC here just because it's our state media. I could pick The Guardian, The Telegraph, I could pick any of them and they will all just repeat this crap that the BBC, the government have said, just the same way as the BBC did. You can see there I've highlighted 70 people suffered to death and hundreds are still suffocating, said Raed al-Saleh, head of the White Helmets. What they don't say there, the BBC, Raed al-Saleh can't get admittance to the United States because of his ties to terrorism. They don't put that there. But that's the people that they use as the evidence that, 70 people would have died or 150 people had died. Going forward after that, a few months later, the BBC did a sort of a recap of all the evidence they had to prove that it was Assad that had actually used these chemical weapons. Now, again, they don't want to go over old ground, but they didn't report that on all the stuff that the independent media had found, they didn't report on Robert Fisk's 7 times overseas journalist of the year, Robert Fisk. They didn't report on what he found either, and that's what he found was, it's actually a false flag. This was just dust inhalation. It was hypoxia. He interviewed dozens of people at the clinic where this attack, supposedly they were helping the victims. Nobody could find any proof who actually went over there on the ground. But according to these open sources, this is what happened, and this is what we're being told to believe. So who are these other open sources? It's not just the White Armies. Well, there's 2 main ones. When it comes to Syria, when it comes to any conflict, especially in Syria, and anything around the world, there's the other one. Syria, the first one with Syria is the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. I've spoken about this quite a bit, but I've never actually gone into depth on who they are. Now, the BBC say that it's a UK-based monitoring group. Now, strangely enough, they put that in now, and any articles that they do from this point on, but they never used to, and the only reason they're putting it in now is because they got a backlash from people like me for not telling people who the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights are. Because if you actually look at Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, it sounds like one of these wonderful organisations, these charities that are doing great humanitarian work in Syria. We should believe them. But they say it's a UK-based monitoring group, and they said airstrikes on 6th and 7th of April killed almost 100 people. So that's the evidence they've got. That's the first question. That's the evidence. It comes from Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. I'll come to the other one in a second. Just want to concentrate on them. Do a simple Google search. Forget all the articles that have been written in depth about him. Just look at the facts about this guy. This is from Wikipedia. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights is run by Rami Abdul Rahman from his home in Coventry. It's a geezer about 30 miles away from me, in his house in Coventry. Okay, so what makes him an expert, and why should we believe him? Well, Abdul Rahman is a Syrian Sunni. Oh, great. Okay, so straight away, if you know anything about Syria and the Middle East, if he's a Syrian Sunni, he's anti-Assad. He's anti-Assad, he's anti-Iran, he's pro-Saudi Arabia. You can guarantee those 3 things. Who owns a clothing shop? So he's a tailor. Why? Remind me, why are the BBC saying that this is the expert, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights? Is it because the title that he's given has been, convincing? So he's a tailor who's a Syrian Sunni. Born Osama Suleiman, so that's not really his real name, Rami Abdul Rahman. He adopted a pseudonym during his years of activism in Syria and has used it publicly ever since. After being imprisoned 3 times in Syria, Abdul Rahman fled to the United Kingdom, fearing a 4th jail term, and has not returned. So this, just by reading the first paragraph on Wikipedia about him, should be nowhere near the BBC as a trusted source. But it gets worse, because this is why he's a trusted source. The organisation says on its website that the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights is not associated or linked to any political body. Well, that's good. However, in the very next paragraph, Ian Sinclair of Media Lens confirmed in communication with the Foreign Office that, quote, the UK funded a project worth £195,000 to provide the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights with communications equipment and cameras. So he's funded by the UK government. Do you think they put that in the BBC article, or the Guardian article, or the Telegraph article? No, of course they don't. This is a guy who is there, whose specific job, it looks like, is to give the government information to manufacture consent for us to go to war. That's who the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights are. That's who they are. One guy in Coventry, 30 miles from me, sitting in his house with £195,000 worth of equipment the UK government gave him. What about the other organisation that they said in the BBC? Bellingcat. The British Investigative Journalism website. It's a journalism website. So, okay, what evidence did they have about this attack? They counted at least 34 bodies in 2 videos circulated by Doom and Revolution. Okay, it's not exactly convincing, is it? It certainly doesn't say who perpetrated the attack, let alone, They did some good work actually triangulating where the attack happened. Bellingcat did. I remember watching it. It's very in-depth. And this is what they do. They use pictures and open sources and Google Earth and stuff like that to pinpoint things. To pinpoint. They did great work, supposedly great work, on the MH17 downing in Ukraine by Russia. That has, many of which has been debunked thoroughly over the years since. Okay, so that's the evidence that Bellingcat gave. But who are Bellingcat? That's the question, the second question. Who's the source? Bellingcat. Okay, why should we trust Bellingcat? Well, this is Bellingcat. Again, Wikipedia. Bellingcat is a website founded by the British citizen journalist Elliot Higgins. So again, a geezer. This time it's a geezer, apparently with people working for him though. Okay. Bellingcat publishes the findings of citizen journalist investigations into war zones and the criminal underworld. The site's contributors also publish guides to their techniques as well as case studies. Well, this sounds interesting. It sounds better than the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, marginally. Bellingcat has received grants from... This is the third question. Bellingcat has received grants from Google Digital News Initiative, Adesium, the Open Society Foundations. The organisation publishes guides on how to... This actually doesn't sound too bad. But then the second question comes back. Because Elliot Higgins, who is this guy that is just this fantastic person who can deconstruct all this information? And why is he the guy, and Bellingcat, the website, that published the Skripal suspects' passports? If they're just citizen journalists who analyse stuff that's freely available on the web, how did they get their hands on the passports of the Skripal suspects, who allegedly had ties to the MOD in Russia? How did they do it if all they are is citizen journalists? Maybe this explains it. Elliot Higgins is a member of the Atlantic Council, so therefore he's no doubt getting plenty of help from all the funders of the Atlantic Council. And just to point out how shitty the Atlantic Council are and how they are not to be trusted, you look down their list of people that are on their board, people such as Chertoff, people such as Henry Kissinger. These are war criminals that are on the board of this council, that are now the arbiters of free speech, that are now the arbiters of what's true and what's not on the internet. These are who they are. People like Chertoff, people like Henry Kissinger. And today is 100 years since the end of World War I. And they've done an op-ed on how war is terrible. Do you want to know who wrote it for them? Madeleine Albright. The woman who said starving 1 million Iraqi children was, quote, worth it. Going forward, and it's going to happen, the UK and the US government and French governments and Swiss governments and all those, they are going to be lying to us to get us into war. When this happens, those 3 questions are what we need to ask. First of all, what's the actual evidence that you've got? Think about the Skripal affair. What's the actual evidence you've got of that? Second of all, where's the evidence come from? I mean, if it's Alex Jones, you can throw it out the window, probably. Chances are it's going to be false. Or some of the dog organisations. But there are times when you ask those questions and it immediately becomes apparent that, hey, this stuff is factual. What's the evidence? Oh, well, the evidence is a DNC email that say they rigged the primaries against Bernie Sanders. Okay, what's the source? Well, the source is WikiLeaks. Okay, at that point, I'm like, this is 100% true. WikiLeaks is trusted. They've never published anything that is unfactual, and they've had to retract. And who funds them? The people. That's who funds WikiLeaks. If those three questions come back and the answers are dodgy, and they end up with the result being the Atlantic Council or DFR Labs, and the funders being the governments and the army, don't trust it. We're just being lied to and propagandized into war. If you like this video and you want to see more, please subscribe and click the bell below so you get a notification of when I drop further videos. Independent voices like mine, I'm sure you're aware by now, are being censored across all social media platforms, so please like and comment on the videos. That really does help the channel out, and share the videos wherever you can to grow the audience. If you can, please support me on Patreon. You can do it for as little as $1 a month. I cannot do this without your help. I rely on your donations. Thanks very much for your support. It really is appreciated. Until next time, peace and take care.